Today's episode is a little different. It's about people, leadership, and creating an environment where entrepreneurs and communities can grow together. It's always special when a guest joins the show who is just impressive on paper, but is someone you've personally watched grow, lead, and serve with heart. Today, I'm honored to welcome someone I've known for years, Eddie Andrews. Eddie is a 3-term Iowa state representative now running for governor of Iowa. But beyond the title, he's a husband, father, entrepreneur, mentor, and community builder who believes deeply in the idea that people, not politics, create lasting change. Eddie brings infectious energy, genuine connection, and a passion for helping people move forward in business and in life. And while he's currently running for governor, this conversation isn't about politics. It's about leadership, entrepreneurship, resilience, and what it really means to help a state thrive. Let's dive in. Hi, Eddie. It's so great
Pauline.
to see you.
Great to see you as well. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it sure has. I want to start by talking about your entrepreneurial roots. You've been an entrepreneur and business leader long before your work in public service. Can you share a moment from early in your business journey that really shaped the way you lead today?
Well, I think one of the big lessons that I've learned is actually from Google. There was a training that I went to, and we talked about failing fast. In other words, not that they were promoting failure, but the fact is that you need to get your idea out, be fast, be quick. And another one of the lessons that I learned from one of my mentors is start before you're ready. Like if you're a perfectionist, you will never, ever start. There's never going to be a moment where you are 100% ready. And so get your plan ready, get everyone at the table who needs to be at the table, do the best you can, but most importantly, get started.
That's great. Leadership is leadership, right? So what principles from entrepreneurship do you believe translate best into leading a state like Iowa?
Well, not just being an entrepreneur, but for my own company, but one of the things that I've done is I've both in the tech area where I've provided technology to multiple multi-billion-dollar companies, but also standard operating procedures, SOP, looking at ways for that particular business to improve their relationships with their customers, to get more business, how to better serve what they have and acquire more customers. And along the way, it's really interesting that I've acquired a lot of things that have gone right with a lot of companies and a lot of things that don't go right with companies. Things that are universal, things that are not, things that are unique to that industry or that business or that culture or that area. And so that's given me lots of insight as to how to run this multi-billion-dollar entity that we call the state of Iowa. And so it's given me an insight. I mean, right now I can go in as governor and start programs that I'm just dying to do. Like if this were a company, I've looked at a number of companies and I thought, oh my goodness, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? Or have you thought about this? Or have you considered doing it this way? And I've got 12 different things that I can look at right now on day one that I would immediately start improving in the state of Iowa. Not that we're not well run. Keep in mind, we have this joke because obviously Florida is a larger state and gets a lot of national news and national attention for their conservative views. And so sometimes people will say, oh, Iowa's the Florida of the Midwest. And so our joke is that Florida is the Iowa of the Southeast. So we're a well-run state, but there are vast improvements that we can make. And a lot of those ideas that I have come from not just being a casual observer, but this is part of my business. This is what I do. This is what I look at companies and find ways to better serve their customers. And for Iowans, the constituents are the customers.
When you talk with Iowa business owners, especially small business owners, what themes do you hear over and over again about what they need to truly thrive?
Get out of the way. Even though we don't have nearly the amount of regulations as some of the other states, especially the blue states, the theme is get out of the way. Let us do business. One of the programs that I've come up with as part of my campaign plan is RED, which does not stand for keeping the state red or Republican hands, but in this case, it stands for Rural Economic Development, and getting those programs outside of the 3 or 4 big cities in Iowa to the rural communities and let those areas continue to thrive, and if they're not thriving, to get them to thrive. And whether that's one of the tasks of that RED plan is to effectively let businesses start. It's almost like a right to try. Like, just get started and we'll worry about the paperwork later. If they reach certain goals and benchmarks within a certain period of time, we actually would give them an incentive of maybe a small incentive of maybe $1,000, effectively acting as seed money. And then after that period is over, then begin the regulations, begin the paperwork. And really the quickest thing or the best thing for a business to do is to get started. Get off the business plan and get into reality.
That's so good. And it's, like you said, getting started. That's the hardest part, right? Like going from the planning phase to the doing phase, getting out of your head and getting into action.
Absolutely, 100%.
Eddie, let's talk about property taxes for a minute, because that's a huge topic. You've been advocating for phasing them out. Why is that such an important issue in your mind? And how do you think a change like that could help entrepreneurs and business owners in Iowa?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is the number one topic here in the state of Iowa. Obviously, it's gotten some attention from the state of Florida, other states in the upper Midwest, and a few around the country. I've been talking about this, and when I heard, was it about a year ago, Governor DeSantis sent out a tweet, and I'm like, have you been listening to my speeches? Because it sounds just like something I said. Obviously, great minds can think alike. I'm sure he didn't steal anything from us. But the point is that we were thinking along the same lines. And now you hear, even in the White House, they're talking about these kinds of plans to eliminate, phase out property taxes. And sometimes when I go around the state and ask people who would design a tax system like property taxes right now, if you had to start all over, would you design the system that way? And almost no one raises their hands. And so I say, well, why are we maintaining it just because it's here? I know the phrase says thinking outside the box, but I really do. I'm a premise challenger. Like, why do we accept that premise that this is the way it should be done? Not just because it's been done that way. And I personally know several people who literally own their homes, and I put that in quotes, own their home, but now they're on fixed incomes. They may be a senior person, maybe in their 90s or 80s. Now they're struggling and they need financial assistance, sometimes from family, sometimes one actually even put a fundraiser out to help them pay their property taxes so that they didn't have to lose the home that they owned. Again, owned in quotes there. And we just have to do a better job of that. And it's not just Iowa who realizes this, it's other states. We've tried to fix, and I say we collectively as a legislature have tried to address different aspects of this. But the way it's designed, and it's almost universally designed in various states, it's like a game of whack-a-mole, right? You fix this and then you realize, oh, well, this is related to this. And then you fix this and you stop that hole. And eventually you just realize you just need to abandon the entire system, phase that out, start with a system that actually works. And families love that. I mean, it gives families more relief. I was talking to one county supervisor who was also a former mayor. And I remember the hesitation And that might be a soft word. They were not buying this. Like, Eddie, how are you going to do this? And, the two questions we always get asked, well, what about public schools? What about first responders? Because that's typically what the majority of property taxes fund. And I say, well, we're going to do this without losing those two entities. Right. And then they look puzzled and like, how are you going to do that? And I remember this one meeting we went to with that particular supervisor, and I believe there was a recorder there and there was maybe another auditor there. And at the beginning of the meeting, it was not quite hostile, but very, I'm not buying what you're selling. You're going to destroy our community if you do this. And then close to the end, they were like, it's not as bad as I thought. And by the end of the meeting, they're like, this might actually work. Let's start talking real numbers. And so we started just actually punching in the numbers from that particular county. And I think the more and more people see this, the more they realize it can work and should work.
Well, that's good, because I've wondered about how that would work as well. How does that affect the local cities and municipalities? How does that affect the departments that are funded by the property tax dollars? And does that centralize control to the state?
Not necessarily. So I can speak for my state, but there are several steps. But the first step would be what we call the $5.40 levy, as it's referred to, $5.40, which goes to education, the first $5.40 of that $1,000 levy. And I must also say and preface this conversation by saying this probably will work only in conservative, well-run states, because it assumes that you're running a surplus. Obviously, if you're in California, not a thing. If you're in Minnesota, not happening, right? You can't even begin this conversation if you're not running a fiscally well-run state as it is. And so part of that first 540 money, in this case, each state is different, obviously, would go directly to education. Effectively, the state would buy that education levy from the local entities. The only thing that the city would see or the state would see is that the money would be coming from a different entity. They're not, if it's pass-through money for them, it would just be pass-through money around them in that case. Again, no one's affected. It's just the state is buying that back and effectively reducing the state surplus by that particular amount. Again, it starts with the premise that you are in a fiscally well-run state, solid. Well, and as you may know, Iowa is in the middle of a three-peat. We are recognized as the most fiscally sound state 3 years running. And that is something that I would certainly continue as governor.
I love it. How do you see education connecting to workforce development, innovation, and long-term business success in the state?
So, Pauline, it sounds like you have touched again on one of my passions. Education is it's actually on the top of every piece of material that I hand out. My business cards, my palm cards, my flyers, is getting Iowa back to number one. If you weren't aware, Iowa for decades led, not just near the top, but we led the nation in education. And somewhere along the line, we gave away the Iowa model. That was the standard of the nation. And went with the national models, the No Child Left Behind, the Common Core, the ESSAs, all those things. And we went from the top of the top to middle of the pack. I think we're rated number 23 right now. And the opposite is also true. The state of Mississippi went from 49th by adopting effectively the Iowa model to 9th in 6-year time span, right? And for our state, the state of Iowa, it's one thing when you've never been at the top and you say, hey, I want to improve education. But when I grew up, we were perennially the national leader in education. And to just give that away without a fight it's just disturbing to me. And so that will be one of my top priorities from day one. And a well-educated populace means a well-educated workforce. A well-educated workforce means you can do anything, right? And I'm a strong believer that we are made in God's image. And if you look at the very fifth word of the Bible, it refers to creativity. In the beginning, God created. Like there was nothing there. And he said, let's check this out, right? And we have that same creativity. We have that same entrepreneurial spirit, if you will. And that includes an entrepreneurial spirit and the things we can do with education and excellence. And so we want to bring every tool that we have to educate our kids and get Iowa education back to number one.
Absolutely. And I grew up in Chicago, and I remember taking the Iowa test. I remember the Iowa being, yes, exactly. I remember Iowa being like the gold standard for education.
And it's not, but it will get back there if they elect Eddie Andrews for the next governor.
Let's talk about property rights. I'm a realtor, and I've been licensed as a realtor for over 20 years. I'm still very, very passionate about real estate. So protecting private property rights is a very important issue for me and for many others in and around the real estate industry and, homeowners, business owners. So entrepreneurs rely heavily on certainty and ownership security. How does your commitment to ending eminent domain for private gain intersect with business confidence and investment in Iowa?
Boy, that's a great question. Again, a lot of things that are important to me you're asking about. So if I could just expand that a little bit, in the upper Midwest, there's a different kind of property rights battle that's going on right now. If you're not from, say, Iowa, Minnesota, the two Dakotas, maybe Nebraska, parts of Illinois, many people don't even know what we're talking about when we're talking about no eminent domain for private gain or property rights in general. But in our case, we have a pipeline that wants to go through these upper Midwestern states, and it's the greatest thing in the world to them. And the only issue is they just need your property to do it. And if they can't get your permission, they petition the state to actually grant them eminent domain status to then take your property. Now, if you're not in one of those states and you're listening to this and you're saying, well, who in the world would do that? Well, even conservative states are having that fight. And to me, I hope this is okay to say it, but it's like giving a middle finger to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that the Declaration says that we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Obviously, pursuit of happiness includes property. And then the next sentence refers to government's job is to protect those things and not to join in with businesses to take property. And so having a stable property rights status is essential to freedom. And I know it sounds like we're getting philosophical here, but George Washington said property rights and freedom are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. And if you continue to have ifs and what about this with our property rights system, obviously you're going to create an unstable business environment. Now, I come from a fairly urban area of just northwest of our largest city. Not a lot of farms in there. And so when I first got in this battle that's been going on here in Iowa for about 4 years, I had many people in my district who would say, Eddie, why are you so engaged in this? Why are you one of the leaders in this? Because you don't have a lot of farmland. That's not even in your area of the state. And I told them, I said, look, this is about principle. If someone can take someone's farmland, they can take your backyard. if they can do this, then they can do this. If we set the precedent that a business owner gets to decide what you can do on your property outside of the standard uses of traditionally used eminent domain, such as roads and railroads and so on and so forth, then we really effectively have no property rights. And that is the foundation, or one of the foundation of freedom. So we're all about that. And once we can completely set that up as a stable, business-friendly environment, businesses and families will feel more welcome to do business here in Iowa.
Very well said. Let's talk about health, well-being, and the workforce. With Iowa ranking second highest in cancer cases and water quality concerns, how do you see healthcare and environmental health impacting the business community and workforce sustainability?
Well, I think the premise of your question is accurate. It is all related. The state of Iowa received a report card about a year and a half ago that made the announcement that Iowa is the second highest cancer rate state. And that's the only state that is growing in its rate. Second only to Kentucky. We know what goes on in Kentucky, right? And so we were all shocked. Like, what are we doing here in Iowa that would lead to that? And, we all have ideas, but before we start spending resources upon resources, let's do the obvious things and then let's study this issue, right? We know that there's a high radon concentration here in Iowa, which can cause cancer. And so we thought, well, why don't we make sure that people have access to radon kits? Again, if you're in different parts of the country, that may not be as high. Also, we looked at just other options. We're looking at maybe giving free cancer screenings. Obviously, it won't change the cancer, but if you can find and detect things early, maybe you have a better shot of winning in that battle. But ultimately, you want to get to the roots. And so we've spent resources. We just passed a multi-million-dollar study at the University of Iowa to really find out what's going on. And again, we have ideas, but we really want to make sure that we know what we're talking about before we start investing lots and lots of resources. And obviously, we know that food, healthy activities always play a role in healthy environments. The other things that you mentioned, like healthy farming, regenerative farming, also can improve our water quality. Again, healthy Iowans means a healthy state, healthy business environment, healthy schools, and everything like that. So,
yeah, when you talk about water quality, I just had the thought about when I moved, and just for the audience's sake, if this is their first time ever hearing my show, I lived in Iowa for 20 years, raised my family there, and it was a wonderful place to be for us. I was already aware of the fact that the impact of the farming fertilizers that are used on farmland comes down the river and into the Gulf. Now that I live on the west coast of Florida and I go over to the Gulf, now I know what red tide really is and how nasty that is. It's something like I had no idea. I'd heard of it, but to see the fish kill, to smell it, to go close to the water and have a cough because of the respiratory distress that it starts to cause as you're in that environment, the effect on your skin. And, I don't know all of the effects, but I'm just explaining the experience that I had, that now I check the water quality before I go over to the beach. And now I have more of an understanding why Floridians sometimes are just like, oh yeah, the beach will always be there. and so I totally get it now. But
right. And we have to be what we call being good stewards of our environment, right? Doesn't mean you're a tree hugger or anything like that, or whatever that means now. But it does mean that we do have to look out for our neighbors and ourselves, making sure that water quality is there for all the residents, not just in Iowa, but as you mentioned, the water doesn't know any borders. It keeps on going, right? And if we can do the same thing with regenerative farming, with what they now refer to as alternative farming, and it's been proving that you can get record crops without using excessive pesticides and so on and so forth. And so we have people in the state who, in my humble opinion, are going the opposite direction and saying, oh, well, let's provide protection for these companies, liability protection, instead of saying, why don't we fix the problem? Why don't we understand the problem and resolve the problem? So let's get everybody at the table who needs to be at the table, look at what the issues are, find out solutions, incentivize if necessary, and make sure that what we pick up from our soil is wonderful, and that the water that we drink that filters through our soil is pure and clean to drink.
Exactly. What does transparency in government leadership look like to you?
Oh boy. I can certainly tell you what not having transparency in government looks like. It looks like Minnesota. It looks like New York. It looks like all these states with fraud. Transparency in government is just being open, understanding what government is. It really gets back to that. Government isn't just some entity that just exists without humans. We are here to serve the public. Government doesn't create the people create the government, right? And it's our job to serve our constituents. And so anything we do, why should it not be transparent, right? One of the things that I would like to do as our next governor is to create an open dashboard, effectively, of state expenditures. So you can literally see every second, up to date, where your money is, how it's being used, what it's being used for, and so that you don't have to wait till for end of year reports. You can actually see right now. And if you have a question, answer your question, submit your question. It's our job to be open. Why would we not be open?
You got it.
And I would only add to this is to make sure that we have adequate consequences for not being transparent.
Exactly. That's very good. Entrepreneurs fail forward. Can you share a time something didn't go as planned and how that shaped you as a leader?
Boy, how many of those stories would you like? I don't think we have enough time for that. But I can tell you plenty of times where horrible things happened. I remember one of my first, I want to say my second real startup. Things didn't work out the way we wanted. The growth, we were growing so fast that it changed our business model. And at some point, we realized, oh my goodness, we don't have enough cash. Our burn rate is we're going to be gone, guys, in 6 to 8 months if we don't pivot correctly. And so we got everyone in the building, and we had every other day we would have a brainstorming session, and we would engage everyone from, if you were the receptionist, if you were we're all in this together. And of course we did turn the company around. We were trying to sell the company. No one wanted a sinking ship, effectively. As soon as we broke even, all the calls were being answered again. And, 3 seconds after we got $1 in the black, now people really wanted to be interested. But what I learned by that is everyone's opinion is valuable. Everyone's. And everyone has a stake in this. And similarly, in the state of Iowa, everyone has a stake in this. We're all in this together. And so I want to hear from everybody. Another thing about entrepreneurial leadership lessons, I learned from failure. I learned from failure. One of the sayings that I now have is that some of the worst things in my life have been the best things in my life. It took a long time to actually get to say that with a straight face, but it really is true that I can look at my life and see some of the things that initially were failures. I remember one time we had a business. I actually sold the business. I had actually sold the business, so it technically wasn't my business, but we were talking like, very short time after that. And, my passwords were still known, and, I don't remember what happened there, but it was old school identity theft, like old school identity theft. People got my information and walked into Bank of America and walked out with my money, my personal money, not just the business money. And we went from doing okay to being in the red, like overnight. I mean, just absolutely was destructive for my family, for myself, for my personal finances. But it turned out eventually, and I do say the word eventually, that it turned out to be a good thing because I learned who not to trust, what signs to look for, all those things. And I learned that you can actually work 3 jobs in 24 hours and still get a couple hours of sleep. It may only be 3, but I learned that you can work your way out of that eventually, and that things do happen. And I also learned that the lessons where that took me, that it took me into new places where seemingly things that are unrelated to that happened. I got involved in Hispanic ministry, ended up leading a congregation or co-pastoring a congregation of Hispanic origin for like 12 or 13, 14 years. And there's a direct link from those bad things that happened to a lot of good things that actually happened. And so the bigger lesson is wherever you find yourself, what can you learn from that situation? You're there for a reason.
That's so powerful. So let's close with the last question. Let's talk about your vision for the Iowa business community. Fast forward 10 years, what would success look like for Iowa? Not just politically, but as a thriving, innovative home for entrepreneurs, small businesses, and families.
I love that question as well. So businesses react to incentives. I'll give you one example of Delaware. When we think of incorporating, we think of Delaware because they make that particular feature so easy. And there's a reason why they lead the nation in business incorporations, right? I believe they get, don't quote me if I'm wrong, but the point is they make multiple billions of dollars off of that feature that their legislature enacted and their governor signed. So as governor, I want to make Iowa the most business-friendly state by far, by an order of magnitude, right? And because businesses respond to incentives, I want to make Iowa the best state for businesses. I want Iowa to be the first thing, not the second or third or afterthought, that entrepreneurs think about when they want to start a business. I want an Iowa that is free of excessive restrictions, excessive regulations, to make effectively a turnkey solution to start your business, to get up and running. All the tools that you need should be ready on day one. And once you're in business, we want to make sure that we have a thriving community that supports Iowa, and not just the 5 major cities, right? I have this saying that, we have an Iowa economic development plan in place, but many of the rural ones don't feel like it ever leaves the top 5 counties. And so we want to make sure that my RED plan, the Rural Economic Development Plan, makes every single Iowa area, every single section of Iowa, the rural areas, the Northeast, the Northwest, the Southeast, the Southwest, are all thriving. And whether that's providing incentives for even remote movers to actually move to that area and get it up and thriving, and so that you have something, beyond, in some communities, they don't have much other than an elevator to keep young people there, to keep that area thriving and growing with young families, older families. And so I see a business community that's spread throughout Iowa.
Eddie, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your perspective, your heart for people, and your vision for creating real opportunity, especially for entrepreneurs, families, and communities across Iowa. I truly appreciate the way you show up and lead. This conversation is personal to me too, because like I said, it was my home. It was where I raised my family and built a great career. So this means a lot to me. And for those listening, if today's conversation resonated with you, and if you believe in getting involved at a grassroots level, Eddie Andrews is actively looking for volunteers, whether that's helping with phone calls, writing postcards, or making a donation to support the work ahead. I'm sure Eddie and his campaign would greatly appreciate you. And if you're a business owner or a brand looking to align with purpose-driven conversations and live experiences, I'm currently welcoming show sponsors and event sponsors for the Pauline Chilton Show experience, our upcoming in-person events. You can learn more or reach out directly at thepaulineshow.com. As always, you can always support the show by using our affiliate links for Descript and Adobe, the very tools we use to produce these conversations. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, share, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. It truly helps the show grow and reach more people. And until next time, keep building, stay engaged, and remember, meaningful change starts when good people choose to show up.